Today, we talk about one of the most famous survivors in the game of Dead by Daylight, Mikaela Reid. When she first entered the scene, she single-handedly changed the whole meta of how survivors would play in the game. She brought a certain series of perks with her that, applied correctly, could absolutely ruin the experience for the killer and make survivors have a much easier time escaping. And even though her perks have been nerfed since her initial release, the existence of boon perks, as they have come to be called, have still changed the way survivors play the game overall and how killers react to them. But before we can get into how Mikaela Reid functions in the game, let's talk about how she exists in Dead by Daylight. When Mikaela was 16 years old, she lost her father. No mention of a mother. We can assume that she either passed away earlier on or that she walked out on the family. Regardless, Mikaela went through a very difficult time without her father. He clearly meant a lot to her, and the loss of her father left a very deep hole in her heart that she needed to figure out how to fill. Luckily for her, she had her friends and she had other people in her life who were able to help her move forward. She also found escapism through storytelling, particularly scary stories, and in every autumn, especially around the Halloween season, Mikaela Reid would begin crafting together scary stories and would even invite all of her friends to come together and share in a fun night of storytelling, games, spooky antics. It all seemed to alleviate the somberness that they all felt. It was kind of a way for friends to come together and overcome their difficult struggles and turn Halloween, typically a spooky, scary season, into a very fun, lighthearted season. And you know what? That's wholesome. I can get behind that. Oh, and also Mikaela Reid became interested in witchcraft. Yeah, no real way to go into that one way or the other, which leads into my first problem with Mikaela Reid's story, but we'll get into that later. For her job, though, Mikaela does have a job. Mikaela Reid worked at a barista in Moonstone. And every Friday night, she would host a story reading show at the Moonshine Barista, where she shared all of her stories and readings live for her audience. Her roommate and best friend Julian would actually record some of her shows and post them online. Also, unbeknownst to Mikaela, Julian actually sent one of her shows to a major event in town called the Endless Halloween Festival. Mikaela was very surprised and elated when she got the email from the Endless Halloween Festival folks, who told her that they would like to have her on for their performance. And the grand prize for winning the storytelling competition would be more than enough to kick off her big line of products of her witchcraft stuff that she wanted to sell. So she immediately got right to work. She set up some negative thought cleansing incense in her room. We'll get into that, and began writing her big magnum opus story. But things were not going well for Mikaela in the writing front. No matter how many different beginnings and styles she tried, she felt she couldn't quite grasp the terror that she really wanted to with this story. Believe me, I get that. But something was starting to scare her. Every night from the time she started writing the story, she began having nightmares, horrid night terrors. And they all went the same way. It always started with her being thrown down a dark set of staircases down into a basement. Then she would be impaled by a giant meat hook, and a shadowy figure would hang her into the air on that meat hook as she screamed. The scream that she made would then wake her up, and she'd be drenched in sweat, laying in her bed, and every night, like I said, the exact same nightmare plagued her. Her energy was low. Her magic felt drained, and after a while, Mikaela began to fear that something horrible was going on, especially as her work performance at the barista began to go downhill. As the nightmares finally got worse, she contacted Julian and asked her to keep an eye on her while she slept to make sure that nothing odd was happening while she was suffering these nightmares. Julian agreed and recorded her while she slept. Julian was stunned to see that not long after the nightmare started, she began to actually levitate off of her bed. He tried to wake her by grabbing her shoulder, and then she screamed, and there was a loud crashing noise as great spider-like fangs started coming out of the bathroom door. Mikaela woke up, and Julian tried to run and close the door. They slammed the door shut. Mikaela told her to help her barricade the door, and then the power went out. Boom. Spooky stuff. We went from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. We went from a simple story about a girl who lost her father, dabbled in witchcraft, told scary stories. Now she's having nightmares, and then bam, spooky, scary skeletons. It's crazy. Luckily, nothing happened that night. No, I'm not even kidding. We have giant spider fangs coming out of the bathroom, but as soon as the power goes off and comes back on a few minutes later, everything's fine. Well, that's something. But the next morning, Julian was gone. Wherever he was, Mikaela had no idea, though had she only paused to listen, she might have heard the muffled cries coming from behind the bathroom door. I know I'm joking around. I'll explain why in a minute. At the Halloween festival, she was nervous to share her story. Shaking hands took the microphone as she prepared to launch into her story for the night. The crowd watched her with rapt attention. She spoke in a haunting voice of dark things, frightening places, and long-lost truths. But as she spoke, the entity decided he was done with her fan fiction and claimed her for his realm, where he could redefine horror for her forever. Now, Mikaela's lore is decent enough, but I see two major problems with it. The first is the whole witch angle. It doesn't seem necessary to her character. See, I thought the idea of being a witch or Wiccan or whatever would be somehow relevant to the entity's interest in her, like some spell she tried to perform got the entity's attention, or she summoned it accidentally, but it really didn't factor into anything that I could tell. Even her tome lore doesn't really dive deeper into her witchcraft interest, like why she turned to it, why she hoped to get out of it, where she learned it, or what have you. Like, it doesn't tell me anything. It's kind of neat, but if all she's doing with it is making scented candles, lotions, and doing little blessings over the coffee beans at her barista, I think you could get a similar experience with goop. But let me be clear about something else. The other problem I have with the witchcraft is this. There's no reason for it. See, here's the thing. I would have kind of gotten into the witchcraft angle if maybe she did that as a coping mechanism after losing her father. Like, she loses her father, doesn't know her mother, she turns to something spiritual or occult and finds witchcraft. I'd have been able to buy that. The problem is twofold. Number one, we've established that she had her friends and her storytelling that she jumped into, and that helped fix her life, that helped pull her back from the brink, which is awesome. Like, we can all agree that that was cool. She had her way out. Great. That's good. Where did the witchcraft come in? Why did she need that? You could argue that's just another coping mechanism, but it's delved into so little, it just feels kind of tacked on. It's almost like the creators just wanted to say, we need a reason why she can make boon totems. Let's say she's a Wiccan. Let's say she's a witch. Yeah, but we get characters later who can all make boon totems, and they're definitely not witches or wizards, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to do this. Now, the second problem is Julian, the friend. Okay, so we're introduced to this roommate, a roommate who Mikaela cares deeply about and who supports her. He sees her go through these nightmarish events and literally sits through an actual horror moment with spider fangs bursting out of the bathroom door and fights to protect Mikaela. And then the very next morning after all that happened, he disappears and Mikaela just goes on with her day. Yeah, if you read the actual lore, Mikaela just kind of goes, that's weird, I wonder where he is. Well, I'm sure he'll show up eventually. And just goes through the next few days like nothing's wrong. Like, I'm sure he's fine. It's just, yeah, I mean, you can't just say it was all a nightmare and then hand wave away your best friend's disappearance. His disappearance should have sparked way more red flags for Mikaela than what they did. Like, she should be very scared. Like, she should tell someone. She should let someone know. I feel like that was a missed opportunity. You could have explored that a bit more. Also, Julian was kind of thrown in last minute as just someone who films Mikaela's events. How did she meet Julian? Who was Julian to her? Like, were they childhood friends? Did they meet in school? Does he work at the barista? Like, who is this guy? I feel like there were certain areas that could have been explored more, but really the biggest problem is the witch angle. I feel like that was a missed opportunity, and not only that, poorly planned out. I feel like they just kind of threw that in there, and I know the reason. She's the character who introduced boon totems, and they wanted a reason why she could do it, so they said she's a witch. That's how she can do it. Okay, but then we have characters later who can do it who are not witches and wizards, so that doesn't seem to work anymore. Plus, you don't dive into why she turns to witchcraft. You could have done it better if you'd established that was her coping mechanism for losing her father. That would have been okay, but you didn't go that route. It's kind of out of left field. But I guess for what we got, it's decent lore. I mean, it's fine. It does what it needs to do. It sets up a relatable character, and I'm also happy to listen to another storyteller character. But let's face it, come on guys, let's be honest with each other. Her lore is the last thing anyone cares about with Mikaela. Mikaela was the first survivor to introduce boon perks. We've talked about that a few times. Let's talk about what boon perks are. Boon perks can be thought of as an anti-hex perk. How do they work? It's simple to understand. Unlike Killer's hex perks, which usually appear at the start of the trial and, once cleansed by a survivor, will not come back, boons are usually the opposite. A survivor can find a hex or dull totem and instead of cleansing it, bless it. This will light the totem with a blue fire and create a range of effect around the boon totem of around 24 meters. All survivors in the trial can see the aura of a boon totem, and when in the range of the totem, they will see a blue hue around the world and the chiming of bells. Killers cannot see this aura and must pay close attention for the subtle sound effects of chiming to know when they're near a boon. Killers are capable of snuffing out the boon totem if they find it, but survivors can easily just bless another totem and get their boon back. While only one boon can be active at a time per survivor, if more than one survivor is running a boon, then you can have up to 4 active boons at once in a trial. If a survivor has multiple boon perks active, all of those perks will apply to the boon totem they bless. Now, does that mostly make sense? Did you follow all that? Good. So what do Mikaela's boons do? Let's talk about it. Mikaela runs Boon Circle of Healing, Boon Shadow Step, and Clairvoyance. Boon Circle of Healing was the perk that pissed off most of the killer mains when first released. Why? Because at launch, survivors within the area of this boon could heal themselves without the need of a medkit, meaning that they could very easily evade a killer, run to this area, and heal themselves safely. This perk was nerfed, however, so it's far easier to deal with. Now, some of you may say, why is that such a big deal? We have perks like heal yourself, or, like stuff like that, and it does the same thing. Yeah, but the problem was survivors could run to this boon and then combine it with Shadow Step, which we'll talk about in a minute, to completely hide from a killer, and they have a free healing spot where they can avoid the killer completely. Now, when in the area of this boon, all altruistic healing speeds are increased by 100% max if not using a medkit. Also, the aura of injured survivors can be seen within the boon. Though not as strong as before, this boon still makes for a great tool to speed up the healing process and remains one of the most popular boons to run. So it's still strong, just not quite as strong as it used to be. Then there's Boon Shadow Step. A great hiding perk, and coupling it with Circle of Healing makes for a devastating combo. While in the range of this boon, your scratch marks and auras are all hidden from the killer. This effect will persist for 4 seconds after leaving the boon's range, and it's a great way to ditch the killer, hide your location, and get a healing in. If you have Boon Shadow Step and Circle of Healing on at the same time, you can essentially run into the zone, hide from the killer, they walk past you, start healing yourself. That was the way it used to be. Now you do need someone else to help you out with that. And finally, Clairvoyance, her only non-boon related perk. When you cleanse or bless a totem, this perk activates. If you are empty-handed, as in not carrying an item, you can press the power button to see the auras of all hooks, chests, generators, exit gates, and even the hatch within 64 meters of your location for 10 seconds. Now, I like this perk when you're the last survivor in the trial and you need to find that hatch fast. Unfortunately, I've never been able to use it to do that because usually I'm dead before that happens. So, hey, take it for what it's worth. Overall, Mikaela was an interesting character to appear in the game. Not just because of her design, though it is unique, and not just because she's the first witch we've seen in the game, although again, I've talked about my issues with that, but it was because she brought boon perks to the game. Boons have been a controversial issue for a little while. Some people say that survivors don't need them, some say that they're necessary, and some even say they need to be stronger than they actually are. I actually like boons. I think boons can be a nice little help to the survivors, and I do think that it changes up the way the game plays. But we need to remember that Mikaela was the first character to show up with boon totems in the first place, so that does make her a game-changing character in the grand scheme of things. But unfortunately, guys, Mikaela did not show up with a killer of her own, so we're done with that chapter of Dead by Daylight already, and we're moving on to the next one, and we're going to be talking about the killer of this next chapter, who is quite the artiste. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time in the fog. Take care.